From the very beginning, George Smith Patton Jr. did not resemble the typical American officer of his generation. Born in 1885 in San Gabriel, California, he grew up in a household that treated military history not as a distant past, but as a living legacy. Patton was raised among tales of his ancestors who had fought in the American Civil War and even earlier conflicts. These stories, repeated around the dinner table, created a sense of destiny, an internal belief that he too was meant for the battlefield. Long before he ever wore a uniform, Patton imagined himself not merely as a soldier, but as someone who would influence the course of future wars. His education followed this pattern of ambition. Patton attended the Virginia Military Institute and later transferred to West Point. But even in these formative years, he stood out for his rigid discipline and relentless drive. He struggled with academics early on, especially reading and writing, yet compensated through sheer determination. West Point shaped his character, sharpening his understanding of military structure and responsibility. But what matured even more was his belief that war was the ultimate test of a leader, and that leadership required both decisiveness and personal example. As Patton entered the U.S. Army, the world was approaching a technological transformation. Modern warfare was evolving rapidly, and the emergence of mechanized forces would redefine how battles were fought. When the United States joined World War I in 1917, Patton found himself at the intersection of tradition and innovation. Initially serving as part of the cavalry, he quickly recognized that mounted units were becoming obsolete. Tanks, still primitive and unreliable, were the future. Patton grasped this earlier than most of his peers, and he threw himself into studying their potential. During the First World War, Patton became one of the first American officers to command a tank unit in combat. His experience during the Meuse-Argonne offensive and earlier operations showed him how armored forces could transform the battlefield. It also revealed how unprepared the U.S. Army was to use them effectively. Patton saw the chaos, the mechanical failures, the lack of coherent doctrine, and understood that this new type of warfare required not only machines, but leaders willing to rethink old assumptions. This period deeply shaped his later approach. Boldness, speed, and overwhelming pressure became central to his idea of mechanized operations. Patton's reputation after the war grew in parallel with his interest in reform. He became an outspoken advocate for expanding the U.S. armored forces long before the military establishment took the concept seriously. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, he wrote extensively on the subject, proposed new organizational structures, and pushed for more realistic training. These actions sometimes alienated more conservative officers who preferred to maintain traditional infantry and cavalry doctrines. But Patton believed that future wars would be decided through mobility, coordination, and the ability to deliver rapid armored strikes. His ideas were not abstract theories. Patton devoted himself to training exercises involving tanks and mechanized units. He demanded strict discipline, punctuality, and a high operational tempo from his subordinates. Many soldiers found him harsh, but few doubted his effectiveness. His insistence on precision extended even to personal conduct. Uniforms, equipment maintenance, and behavior in the field were all matters of principle. To Patton, a modern army had to be mentally and physically prepared for sudden, decisive actions. This uncompromising approach built his reputation inside the army, sometimes as a brilliant visionary, sometimes as a difficult and overly strict commander. His temper, sharp remarks, and intolerance for what he saw as complacency led to friction with fellow officers. Yet despite these conflicts, or perhaps because of them, Patton was often the figure associated with innovation. He understood that war required not only preparation, but a mindset capable of adapting to unforeseen conditions. For Patton, leadership meant guiding others through danger with clarity and purpose, not through consensus. As global tensions rose in the late 1930s, Patton observed developments in Europe with increasing concern. The rearmament of Germany, the mechanized blitzkrieg in Poland, and the collapse of France demonstrated the power of rapid armored warfare. These events confirmed what Patton had long believed: the side that mastered speed and coordination would dominate the battlefield. When the United States began mobilizing for a potential conflict, Patton found himself well-positioned to influence the formation of new armored divisions. His experience, combined with his assertive personality, made him one of the key proponents for creating an effective U.S. armored force. During this period, Patton refined his strategic thinking. He emphasized offensive operations, arguing that the most efficient way to reduce casualties was to move fast and strike hard before the enemy could organize a defense. He believed that war rewarded initiative and punished hesitation. This philosophy shaped how he trained his troops. He insisted that they practice rapid maneuvers, coordinated attacks, and continuous pressure tactics that would later define his campaigns in North Africa and Europe. By the time the United States entered World War II, Patton had already developed a distinctive command style. He valued aggressive action, strict discipline, and a relentless operational pace. His personality was forceful, sometimes abrasive, but always focused on achieving victory. These traits did not go unnoticed by American commanders, but more importantly, they attracted the attention of the German military intelligence. Before Patton ever faced the Wehrmacht in battle, German analysts had begun to monitor him. They read American military publications and reports, many of which included Patton's writings on mechanized warfare. They examined his leadership in training exercises and tracked his rising status within the U.S. Army. For the Germans, who valued bold, offensive-minded commanders, Patton stood out as someone whose thinking aligned more closely with their own doctrine than with that of many Allied generals. During the early years of the war, the German High Command considered Patton one of the most competent American officers, even before he gained broad recognition in the United States. They saw him as unpredictable, assertive, and ambitious. These were qualities they associated with successful battlefield commanders. While other American generals remained relatively unknown to them, Patton appeared to embody the characteristics of a leader who could command large-scale, mechanized operations. This perception was reinforced by Patton's growing role in preparing U.S. forces for the challenges ahead. He participated in large maneuvers, oversaw the development of armored tactics, and contributed to establishing doctrines that emphasized mobility and combined arms operations. From the perspective of German intelligence, Patton's involvement in shaping armored divisions suggested that he would likely play a major part in any American offensive. By late 1941 and early 1942, as the United States prepared to enter theater operations, Patton had become a symbol of aggressive American warfare. Within the U.S. Army, he was respected for his ability to transform poorly organized units into effective fighting forces. Among Allied commanders, he was viewed with a mix of admiration and caution, as his strong opinions and demanding leadership style often generated tension. But to the German High Command, Patton represented something more significant, a commander whose mindset and tactics mirrored their understanding of modern war. For this reason, long before he commanded troops in combat, Patton was already singled out by German military analysts as the most dangerous American general. His views on mechanized warfare, his emphasis on speed and initiative, and his willingness to push his forces beyond traditional limits created an image of a leader capable of disrupting German plans. In their assessments, Patton was not merely competent, he was unpredictable and therefore potentially decisive. As the United States prepared for major overseas operations, Patton continued refining his command style, shaping armored units and preparing his soldiers for the realities of modern combat. This period solidified his identity as a leader who expected total commitment and who believed that victory came from relentless action. The foundations of his future successes and the origins of German concern were built long before he set foot in North Africa. It was this combination of upbringing, early experience, innovation, and uncompromising leadership that shaped George S. Patton into the figure who would soon challenge the German war machine directly. And it was during these formative years that the seeds were planted for the myth that would grow around him, both in the Allied ranks and among Germany's highest military circles. When the United States committed fully to the North African campaign in 1942, American forces faced a harsh reality. Their early performance had exposed weaknesses in training, organization, and combat readiness. Morale was shaken, and German and Italian forces under Erwin Rommel had demonstrated their ability to exploit even minor Allied mistakes. It was clear that the American presence in North Africa required not only reinforcements, but decisive leadership capable of transforming underprepared troops into an effective fighting force. This is where George S. Patton entered the stage. In March 1943, Patton was given command of the U.S. WWII Corps. The unit had recently suffered significant setbacks, most notably during the Battle of Kasserine Pass. The defeat had embarrassed the U.S. Army and raised doubts among British commanders about American reliability in large-scale operations. Patton approached the situation with the same strict discipline and urgency that had defined his career. His first steps were organizational, enforcing uniform standards, restoring discipline, and demanding punctuality and preparedness from every soldier. He wanted his troops to move with coordination, respond quickly to commands, and respect the chain of command. In short, he aimed to rebuild confidence by rebuilding structure. Patton's reorganization was not limited to appearance or routine. He focused heavily on improving training, strengthening logistics, and ensuring that troops were mentally prepared for aggressive, fast-paced combat. He pushed units to practice rapid maneuvers, improve marksmanship, and coordinate closely with supporting armor and artillery. Many soldiers disliked his strictness, but they could not deny the sense of renewed purpose. Under Patton, the II Corps became more responsive and more confident in its ability to confront experienced Axis forces. As the North African campaign progressed, Patton's leadership contributed directly to improved American performance. During the push toward Tunis, the II Corps fought more effectively and with greater coordination. Although Patton did not have sole command over the entire front, the areas under his control demonstrated a marked increase in efficiency. His reputation as a combat commander began to shift from theoretical promise to practical effectiveness. Commanders within the Allied forces, including British leadership, took notice of how quickly he was able to restore order to a demoralized force. The impact of North Africa extended beyond Allied assessments. German intelligence also observed Patton's arrival and the improved performance of American troops. For them, the link between Patton's leadership and the revitalization of U.S. forces appeared obvious. Reports from the Africa Corps indicated that American soldiers seemed more organized and responsive following his appointment. These observations reinforced the German belief that Patton played an outsized role in American armored operations and would likely be deeply involved in future offensives in Europe. After the Axis forces were pushed out of North Africa, planning for the next major Allied operation turned toward Sicily. Operation Husky, launched in July 1943, aimed to secure the island and open the central Mediterranean to Allied control. Patton was assigned command of the U.S. 7th Army, working alongside British forces under General Bernard Montgomery. The relationship between Patton and Montgomery was complex. Both were strong-willed, ambitious, and confident in their abilities. However, their strategic approaches differed significantly. Montgomery favored structured, cautious operations, while Patton preferred rapid, aggressive movements to destabilize enemy lines. The Sicilian campaign presented opportunities for both commanders to demonstrate their strengths. Patton initially served in a supporting role to Montgomery, but when Axis resistance stiffened and the British advance slowed, Patton saw an opening. He launched a series of rapid maneuvers across western Sicily, capturing strategic locations such as Palermo. His movements often caught both Allied and Axis observers by surprise due to their speed and decisiveness. Patton's ability to advance quickly over difficult terrain, sometimes faster than Allied plans anticipated, showed his commitment to exploiting every tactical opportunity. Although the Sicilian campaign ultimately succeeded, it also brought controversy for Patton. During the operation, he became involved in incidents where he reprimanded soldiers suffering from combat fatigue in ways that drew harsh criticism. These events triggered political and military concerns, especially at higher levels of U.S. leadership. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and even the FBI became aware of the situation. Eisenhower issued a direct reprimand, and Patton's behavior risked damaging the Allied command structure at a critical time. For a moment, Patton's future in the war appeared uncertain. Despite the controversy, the strategic outcomes of his actions in Sicily were undeniable. Patton had demonstrated that rapid and aggressive operations could overwhelm German and Italian defensive positions. He had shown an ability to move troops efficiently and exploit enemy weaknesses. But the price of these achievements included strained relationships within Allied command and growing skepticism about his judgment. Eisenhower, responsible for maintaining unity among American and British forces, needed to balance Patton's effectiveness with concerns about discipline and political sensitivity. While Patton's position within the Allied command was temporarily weakened, in Germany, his myth only grew stronger. The controversy surrounding him was largely unknown to the German High Command. Instead, they saw the speed of the Sicilian campaign and interpreted it as the work of a bold and unconventional commander. German intelligence, including analysts within the Abwehr, continued to study his strategies, behavior, and public statements. They attempted to build a psychological profile of Patton, describing him as aggressive, creative, unpredictable, and willing to take risks. These traits aligned closely with the German ideal of an effective battlefield leader. Within the German military, Patton stood out as the one American general whose style resembled that of their own most successful commanders. To them, cautious or methodical Allied leaders were not nearly as threatening. Patton's ability to reorganize struggling units, move rapidly across Sicily, and pressure defenders convinced the Wehrmacht that he possessed both operational insight and the boldness required for complex offensive operations. Even as the Allies temporarily reduced his role following the Sicilian controversy, German intelligence believed he remained central to American war planning. As preparations began for the eventual invasion of Western Europe, German analysts increasingly focused on predicting the Allied landing site. They considered multiple fronts, but remained convinced that any major Allied offensive would likely be led by Patton. From their perspective, the most dangerous direction of attack would involve rapid mechanized thrusts designed to break defensive lines quickly. And the general best suited to such an operation, based on their assessments, was Patton. Within the Allied command, however, Eisenhower and senior leaders faced a dilemma. Patton's tactical brilliance and organizational effectiveness were invaluable, yet the political consequences of his earlier controversies could not be ignored. For several months, Patton remained without a major command, effectively sidelined while the Allies prepared for the next stage of the war. But even during this period, his presence remained symbolically powerful. Patton continued training troops, visiting units, and maintaining a visible role within the military structure. Meanwhile, German intelligence interpreted his public activity not as marginalization, but as preparation for a major offensive. Analysts noted his frequent inspections and public appearances and concluded that he was inspecting forces for a planned invasion. They assumed that the most likely landing point would be the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France, and the location easiest to reinforce quickly. If the Allies intended a decisive blow to German defenses, the Germans believed Patton would lead it. This belief was not merely an assumption, it became a foundational part of German strategic thinking. Reports circulated through the German High Command identifying Patton as the primary architect of future Allied operations. Even Hitler himself came to view Patton as the most dangerous enemy general. This perception would later play a decisive role in the success of the Allied deception plan that preceded the Normandy landings. Patton's rise during the North African and Sicilian campaigns demonstrated the strengths and flaws that defined his wartime persona. On one hand, he was a commander capable of transforming struggling forces into efficient, aggressive units. His strategic instincts allowed him to seize opportunities quickly and maintain pressure on retreating enemy forces. On the other hand, his temperament and controversial decisions risked damaging Allied unity and jeopardizing his own position. Yet despite the internal conflicts within the Allied command, Patton's influence steadily increased. His ability to deliver results on the battlefield overshadowed the political complications. Senior Allied leaders recognized his value, even when they felt compelled to restrain him temporarily. Within the U.S. Army, his status as a leading figure in mechanized operations remained intact, and within Germany, his name had become synonymous with speed, aggression, and unpredictability. As the Allies prepared for the decisive phase of the war, the invasion of Western Europe, Patton's role would become both more complicated and more strategically significant. Even when he was not commanding troops in combat, his reputation alone would prove instrumental in shaping the course of the conflict. The next phase of the war would not only restore his position, but elevate him to a level of influence unmatched by any other American general. The foundations of this transformation were laid through his actions in North Africa and Sicily. These campaigns solidified his identity as a commander who could adapt quickly, inspire effectiveness, and unsettle enemy forces through relentless operational pressure. And for Germany, these qualities made Patton the one general they feared above all others, a belief that would soon be used against them in one of the most ambitious deception operations of the war. By 1944, the Allied forces were preparing for the most complex military operation of the war, the invasion of Western Europe. The success of this undertaking depended not only on the strength of Allied armies, but on the ability to mislead the German High Command about the true location and timing of the attack. It was in this context that General George S. Patton's influence reached a level few military commanders ever achieve. His reputation, carefully observed by German intelligence and deeply feared by Adolf Hitler, became a strategic weapon in itself. Operation Fortitude, the most ambitious deception project of World War II, was designed to convince Germany that the Allied landings would occur not in Normandy but in the Pas-de-Calais region. This location, the narrowest point between England and France, had long been considered by both sides the most likely invasion route. It offered direct access to key transport networks and was relatively close to major Allied bases in Britain. The German High Command had reinforced the region heavily, believing that it represented the most logical and dangerous invasion point. To exploit this expectation, the Allies needed to create the illusion of a massive army preparing to attack Calais. They needed a commander whose presence alone would persuade German analysts that a major offensive was imminent. The choice was obvious. No other Allied general commanded the same level of fear and respect within the German military establishment. George S. Patton had become the embodiment of American armored warfare, aggressive, fast-moving, and capable of surprising maneuvers. Even his period of political sidelining after Sicily had not diminished his impact. In fact, German intelligence interpreted it as part of a larger plan, believing he was being reserved for the decisive blow. Operation Fortitude South created a fictitious formation called the 1st United States Army Group, or FUSAG. This phantom army included inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, fabricated landing craft, and entire divisions that existed only on paper. Radio traffic was artificially generated to mimic communication between large-scale units. The infrastructure of ports and camps in southeastern England was built to appear from the air as if tens of thousands of troops were stationed there. And at the center of this massive illusion stood Patton, giving speeches to troops, appearing in widely publicized photos, and inspecting units that in reality consisted only of mannequins and empty tents. The Germans monitored every movement and statement associated with Patton, reinforcing their belief that the Allies were preparing an attack on the Pas-de-Calais. Reports from the Abwehr and military intelligence consistently placed Patton at the top of their lists of dangerous Allied commanders. They studied his campaigns, his methods, and even his personality traits. When they observed him stationed across from Calais, they concluded that the decisive invasion would occur under his command. German analysts believed that the Allies would choose their strongest commander to lead the primary assault, and they viewed Patton as the only leader capable of coordinating a rapid breakthrough against German defenses. Even after the Allies landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, many German commanders remained convinced that this was merely a diversion. They continued to believe that Patton's forces would strike at Calais once the Germans had shifted their reserves toward Normandy. Hitler himself refused to redeploy key armored divisions from the Pas-de-Calais region, arguing that the main attack was yet to come. This hesitation prevented Germany from concentrating sufficient force against the real Allied invasion, contributing to the establishment and eventual expansion of the Normandy beachhead. While Operation Fortitude kept German defenses immobilized, Patton was assigned a new role: leadership of the U.S. Third Army. When he finally entered the Normandy campaign in July 1944, his forces moved with remarkable speed. The bocage terrain, thick hedgerows crisscrossing the countryside, had slowed many Allied units, but Patton's army rapidly found ways to push through. His command emphasized constant motion, aggressive exploitation of gaps, and relentless pressure on retreating German forces. This style disrupted German defensive planning and accelerated the collapse of their lines in western France. Patton's Third Army executed a series of breakthroughs that expanded the Allied advance. His forces liberated large regions of France, capturing towns and severing German supply routes. Patton understood that speed itself was a weapon. The Third Army advanced so quickly that its biggest limitation often became fuel shortages rather than enemy resistance. German units, caught off balance, struggled to regroup or establish coherent defensive positions. The rapid movement of Patton's army became one of the defining features of the Allied advance across France. One of Patton's most notable contributions came during the German counteroffensive known as the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. The surprise attack was aimed at splitting the Allied lines and forcing a negotiation. When German forces surrounded the town of Bastogne, Eisenhower turned to Patton, confident in his ability to maneuver quickly despite winter conditions and logistical challenges. In a remarkable operational pivot, Patton redirected his army northward and reached the besieged town faster than expected. His intervention helped relieve Bastogne and contributed significantly to halting the German offensive. The German high command was stunned by the speed of Patton's movements. Reports from the front indicated that his army could reposition faster than German intelligence predicted, and his ability to respond quickly to unexpected situations disrupted the German attempt to regain strategic initiative. The Battle of the Bulge marked one of the last major German offensives of the war, and Patton's counteractions played a vital role in its failure. As the war neared its end, Patton's Third Army continued pushing into Germany, liberating concentration camps and securing strategic locations. His forces advanced deeper into German territory, demonstrating the collapse of Nazi resistance. Patton's operational approach, rapid offensives, exploitation of weaknesses, and constant maneuvering remained consistent. His army often covered distances in days that other units would plan to cover in weeks. This pressure contributed to the broader disintegration of German defenses and accelerated the end of the conflict in Europe. Through all these operations, Patton remained a figure that German commanders struggled to predict. His speed, aggressive decision-making, and willingness to take calculated risks made him a uniquely challenging opponent. In contrast to more cautious Allied generals, Patton represented a type of warfare that resembled early German blitzkrieg, but executed with American resources and momentum. This unpredictability fueled the long-standing German perception that Patton was the most dangerous Allied general. Operation Fortitude's reliance on Patton's reputation, combined with his later combat achievements, cemented his place in military history. His ability to play both a real and symbolic role in the war showcased the breadth of his influence. He was not only a commander on the battlefield, but a strategic asset whose presence shaped enemy expectations and decisions. His leadership accelerated the liberation of Western Europe and contributed to the collapse of the Third Reich. After the war, Patton's legacy became the subject of debate. Some admired his tactical brilliance and ability to inspire his troops. Others criticized his temper, controversial decisions, and difficulties within the Allied command structure. Yet, even with these criticisms, his impact on the war is undeniable. His leadership during key campaigns, his role in one of the most successful deception operations in history, and his influence on both Allied and German strategy established him as one of the most significant American military figures of the 20th century. Patton remains a symbol of bold, decisive action, a commander whose reputation alone could alter enemy planning. And despite the passage of time, historians continue to analyze how a single general could play such a central role not only through combat, but through perception and psychological influence. Patton was a commander whose decisions shaped the course of the war, but also a figure who challenged the norms of military leadership. His unpredictability, intensity, and strategic insight made him a formidable force in the Allied effort. To the German high command, he was the general they feared the most, the one they could never fully anticipate. His legacy today reflects this duality, both a bold strategist and a controversial figure, a leader capable of turning the tide of war, and a man whose presence alone could shape the actions of his enemies. And it was this combination of real ability and perceived dominance that solidified George S. Patton as one of the most influential military leaders of World War II. If you enjoyed this deep look into Patton's impact on World War II, tell us in the comments, which moment of his career impressed you the most? And if you want more detailed historical breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes.